This is Navigating the Cycles of Life with Astrology Insights. My name is Bonnie Isham Willis. My website is healwithbonnie.com. Let me introduce an overview of some of the important or pivotal periods in our lives through the lens of astrology. This video is about 30 minutes long, and I call it Astrology for Everyone. I try to keep the astro jargon to a minimal, and this topic, I believe, affects everyone. When I'm talking about our transits of the outer planets to our natal chart. And I know I just promised I wasn't going to talk too much astrology, but there it is. That's the most, really. The most frequent players in these pivot points, or whatever we're going to call them, the biggest players are Uranus and Saturn, because they are far enough away that they make a big impact. You know, they stay longer and they're big and more everyone rather than personal. But yet their cycles are short enough, their orbits are short enough that it's making a significant impact. And that's the most astrology I hope I have to say. So now you understand it from that perspective. Patterns and cycles. Everyone has them. As I sort of talked about a little bit before, every planet has its own orbit or cycle, just like every person has their own orbit or cycle. The planets, imagine if you will, are moving in their own orbit. Each planet has its own orbit, its own cycle. Some goes faster, slower, bumps into, well, not literally, but you know, they move together, move apart, make aspects to each other, all of that. And people as well, if you think about it, here we are going around in our own orbits most of the time, but then we come together for one group or one interest. Some subgroups within that group perhaps meet every Tuesday or are also interested in birds. And other people yet will run together. They come together, they talk to each other every day. They're at both of these meetings together. The planets are moving in all of these orbits, making different motions at all times, and people are running around in their own orbits, and it is reflected like a mirror, as above, so below. There's some short-term cycles that you might not be aware of, or you could probably use in your astrology trivia. All right, so the 7-year itch does seem to be reflected in astrology by Uranus changes signs and the Saturn squares itself. Those two patterns seem to make enough of an impact that people talk about it. And in this case, they even made a movie called The 7-Year Itch with Marilyn Monroe, for you young people that might not know. All right. Every planet returns. So we're just talking about different cycles of different planets at this point. All of them return. The Sun and Mercury takes about a year. Venus and Mars, it takes about 18 months, something like that. Sorry if I misquote. And the Moon, of course, returns every 28 days. So those are some of the cycles that are going on at all moments, all the time. And that just gives you an idea of how much is happening. This is the cosmic timeline that shows some of the significant life cycles according to astrology, and they definitely seem to correlate with difficult times in our lives. It's not all bad. I hope I'm not giving the impression that all of these stages or ages are bad. They do seem to be life altering. Go left or right seems to make a big decision or big impact at this time. Like a pivot point, a point where your choices matter. Those definitely seem to work through if we're looking at the astrology translation. Okay. So also, if you notice that they happen at intervals, regular intervals, at least if in the first half. And it seems to be about 10 years, about 20, 30, 40, 50, and 60. All of those are significant life affirming points in our lives. May or may not come with an event. Often it does, though. If you hear people talk about their Saturn return or their midlife crisis, then we have some insight for you. When you get to the sort of second half, we still have significant points, but they seem to change up a little bit, and we don't seem that the 10-year pattern is not as precise this time around. I was looking and hoping for that I would see in the second chapter of life, so to speak, that we get an easy time, that we find some sort of great answer. And I'm not trying to belittle it. I really hoped that. I really hoped that I would see that in the astrology, that we get, we get a break when we get a little older. But that does not seem to be true, although 84 looks really, really good. But in general, what is evident is that the cycles keep repeating themselves. So no matter how old you get, Saturn still moves around in cycles of 29 years with 7.5 years-ish of squares of some sort of push. When you're 65, 75, well, it's 72 to 75, and then 84 really does look like a fabulous, wonderful phase, chapter. 80 to 90, well, we'll talk about the different ones later, but this 80 to 90 Pluto and Neptune opposition is very variable, if that's a word, very variable, because their orbits are really far away and irregular. So they go through one sign faster. Certain parts of their orbit go a lot faster than others. And to be honest, I don't know all of the science of it, so I don't want to misquote. But somewhere in that time frame, as we get a little older, approximately the 80s, we have a Pluto and or Neptune opposition. And at 90, we get our third Saturn return. So there's different ways that you can break it up and try to make insight of it. I have broken it up into 3 categories: beginning, middle, and I don't want to say the end, but the culmination, of what we've learned, hopefully. I think this is the path. I think each of these, no, each step, each stage is a place where a cycle is going to happen. We have this Herculean task or test, whatever, this hurdle. It's going to happen no matter what. Every 7 or 14 years, we're going to have something that reminds us of our choices and being conscious of them. I think we lay the path. What we choose and how we deal with one stage determines and chooses and lays the groundwork for the next stage. So what you choose at 20 will be one of the themes when you turn 30. And what you choose and work on when you're 30 will set the stage for when you're 40, and so on. Each stage, each hurdle is laying the stepping stone on your path. That is your path. By, hey, look, I made it through this. This is what I learned. This is what I chose, etc. That's what lays your path. In the beginning. So there are cycles, of course, that happen in our childhood and teenage years, but I didn't focus on that. That would be a whole nother class. I focused from 2021 up, the adult years. So when we are 2021, it's a time of figuring out who we are and where we belong. And that often is separate from our family, our own individual place in this world. There's also themes of Saturn, responsibility, and Uranus, freedom. So we want the freedom, but we don't necessarily want the responsibility or commitment that goes with it. However, you sort of adapt and choose to handle yourself from here, the things that you choose from here, conscious or unconsciously, are laying the groundwork for the next stage. And the next stage comes with the Saturn return at 29 or 30. And I talk about the Saturn return. I think there's even been songs about it or poems or something. It is well known. It really is the initiation into adulthood. We think we're an adult when we're 20 or 21 and we're going out there in the world and we demand our freedom. We think we're grown, but at 30 we're reminded that we really weren't. And I think the biggest lesson I learned from this transit, from the Saturn return, was that I really didn't know much. I thought I knew it all in my 20s. But of course, I realized at 30 that I really didn't know anything. And here I know more than I knew when I was 20. You get it. When we get to midlife, we're learning a lot. It starts before, but right around 40, a couple years before, a couple years after, seems to be a significant point in a lot of people's lives. There's so many stories about what happens that it gets a name. It's called the midlife crisis. That's what regular people call it. In astrology, we know that it's several cycles happening together or back to back or overlapping. So you just can't catch a break right around 40. They're just hard pressed to create change. If we're not uncomfortable, we won't move. So these stepping stones or hurdles or stages, whatever you might want to call them, we have to come up with a better name. At each of these stages, it's getting you ready for the next. It's laying the path. At the midlife crisis, we have Pluto and Neptune squares, and it culminates with the Saturn opposition, or excuse me, the Uranus opposition, and a Saturn trine squeezes in there somewhere. It really is challenging for a lot of it, but there's also some really beautiful things that come from this time. We are reinventing ourselves. We are questioning or thinking about our spiritual quest. And it culminates with the Uranus opposition, where there's really a tug of war going on for your personal freedom. I think the goal, this is just my own personal take on it, but I think the goal of Uranus is for acceptance. It is our little weirdo, you know, our little freak flag. And it's wherever we are a little weird or unconventional. That's what we look at with Uranus. But I think the goal is to just accept that, to say, hey, I like my little freak flag. I like me with my weird parts. Okay? Then when we get to 50, Jupiter return is nice. 48 brings us some abundance and confidence and good cheer. And the Chiron return, right at like 50, 51, is heart-wrenching and beautiful at the same, well, maybe not the same time, but growth. It's just about growth. Chiron is the wounded healer. He has this deep, vulnerable wound. And when you get here, that wound, you're forced to somehow look at it. And you might not even realize it had been working through your subconscious your whole life, and you didn't even know it. These are those really deep wounds that you, like I said, you don't even realize you have them sometimes until the cracks start to show. The beautiful part comes from healing it. You opened it raw, it was painful, but you did it. And you healed from it and you grew. And I think this is the turning point when you say, look, I had this wound. Those of you who might have it or something similar, this is how I did it, and maybe you could feel a little bit better about it. Maybe I can show you. You know, we become a true mentor. Chiron was the wounded healer. So he had his wound, but that only made him more compassionate and willing to help others, especially with things that he had gone through. All right, and when you get to your second Saturn return, about 58, this is a hard time. We're relating, of course, I talked about each step, each stage sort of builds on the last. But some of them, like, relate back to itself. I know that sounds a little confusing, but so your second Saturn return, of course, is going to relate to the first Saturn return. It's also, of course, building upon all of the stages so far. But we're going to look at that first Saturn return at 30, now that we're 60. We're going to look at it a little different. And we're looking at what we chose, how we handled it. Saturn is about responsibility, but he can also require a sacrifice. There's always a choice. If you work really hard, then perhaps you sacrificed your social life or your family life. If you put your family first, perhaps you neglected some things of yourself. Common themes at the first Saturn return and the second. I think when we get here, we get a second chance to do things differently. You know, it comes around again for many of us, especially where you might have shrugged off some of your responsibility or sacrificed. Those are the things I think that you get to look at again and hopefully choose differently, or decide if you would choose differently. Or maybe you appreciate what you chose the first time, and everybody's everybody's path, everybody's is different, because we go through the same hurdles, but we all react differently to them, and we all make our choices a little bit differently. There's of course common themes, but everything is, you know, unique, building upon the last. We are making a very individual and unique path for ourselves. All right, let's look at when we get to 65, second Uranus square and a Saturn opposition. So I think I said before that the biggest players are Uranus and Saturn. Their cycles are quick enough that we see it easily and repeat it over and over again, etc. So these are coming back around again. At 65, will relate back, Uranus square relates back to 40-ish and 20-ish. Saturn relates back to the Saturn return every 14 years. So again, the themes are personal freedom and responsibility. Of course, it's different at 65 than it was at 21, and some of it at 42. What is it at this stage that we are trying to find the balance between personal freedom and responsibilities? 65 is sort of the goal age. I think we have this image in our head that we turn 65, we have all the answers, and we just boom, retire, and everything is perfect. But I don't think that that's true, and astrology would suggest it's not. So for some people, perhaps they have planned it out properly, and at 65 they really are finding their personal freedom, and they are good to retire and live the life they always wanted to. But for other people, I think some things are hard, like perhaps you are retiring, but now you're on a fixed income, or, you know, all sorts of variables. Everybody is a little bit different, and what they've chosen in the previous cycles is going to determine how they go from this new one. 72 to 75, another Jupiter return and another Saturn square. Yes, every 7 years. So that is the part that's evident to me, that it keeps cycling around, that all of these, you know, rather than coming to any sort of conclusion or end, they just keep cycling. We get the same patterns over and over again, but we get to look at them from a different place. I think that's the beauty in the repeating cycles. At 84, it's a Uranus return and a Jupiter return. I think this is a really good year. Personal acceptance and freedom with Uranus, and Jupiter is confidence and optimism and abundance. I think this year is going to feel really good. When we get to our 80s in general, Neptune and Pluto, both with their wobbly orbits, well, irregular, I don't know if wobbly is the right word. Their irregular orbits make it a little hard to figure out how to be precise with when they're going to hit. Now, we can figure that out easily by looking at your personal chart. But in general, for people, there's a little bit of variable. But in your 80s, usually, is when the Neptune opposition or Pluto opposition comes around. And the opposition creates tug of war energy. So feeling like you're being pulled from two sides. It really is trying to find balance, of course. But a lot of times it feels like you're just being pulled in two different directions. Neptune, your spirituality and escapism, perhaps fantasy. Pluto, reinventing yourself, transforming, going deep into, soul area. And then when we get to 88 or 90, we have a third Saturn return. So, of course, this is going to relate back to 60, 58 to 60, and it's going to relate back to 2930. And now this is the third one. So Saturn keeps coming back. Hopefully this time we are better at it, that we've looked at responsibility throughout our life and boundaries and accountability, and we've looked at it in the face and we've been proud of what we've chose. I hope that for everyone that they find the beauty in each of these stages that do have some definite challenging aspects. But the beauty is what it brings or what you achieve. Well, I don't even want to say achieve, where you get, how you grow. That's the way I like it. How you grow. This shows the path of how you grow. Please share your story. I'm looking for volunteers 65 or older who are willing to give me their birth chart and talk about some of the points, important points, stages, hurdles, whatever we decide to call them. Talk about some of those points and we'll put it with the astrology for the research. I hope. I really, really would love to hear from some who have made it to their Uranus return, 84. Anyone in their 80s, I would be exceptionally happy because I've only seen a couple of charts. So just for my own personal curiosity, I would like to see a few more charts and see how this fits in. Thank you. If you're willing, just send me an email at healwithbonnie@gmail.com and include these things. Hopefully you can copy and paste your name, a contact, and a backup contact. Yes, and I have to be adamant about that. So many times I've gotten an email jotted down or a phone number jotted down for me, and I never found that person again because whatever might happen. So a backup contact is very important to me, please. And give me permission to share your birth chart and or story, just for my students or in research. Also, I need your chart information. So your birthday, place of birth, time of birth. And I'm hoping that you can talk about the events or non-events, the feelings that went along with it, growth, strength, all of that. Here's what was hard, here's what was easy. Really, really spell it out for me because those are the things that are important to me. The events, yes, those are also important to chronicle, but I really want to know how you felt about those events, not just the event itself. All right, please let me know. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. This presentation is much more fun in person. We get to share stories and perhaps uncover some great insights together. This is how you can get in touch with me. Heal with Bonnie on Facebook, healwithbonnie@gmail.com, and healwithbonnie.com is my website. So I'm pretty easy to track down. If you want to get me personally, my personal Facebook page is Bonnie Yod Willis. Thank you.